about the Old Testament.
The Old Covenant law of Moses was not the go-to source regarding sexual behavior in the church. More importantly, and perhaps more disturbingly, if that's a word, or offensively, the Old Testament, or the law and the prophets as they called it, was not going to be the go-to source for any behavior in the church. Now, to make this point, because this is so important, I originally in my notes, I was going to put a screen up here that said, in other words, that means thou shalt not obey the 10 commandments. But I knew someone would take a picture of that. And it would define me for the rest of my life. So I'm not going to put it up there, but I want you to hear me say it. Here's what the Jerusalem Council was saying to the Gentiles. You are not accountable to the 10 commandments. You're not accountable to the Jewish law. We're done with that. God has done something new.
And then later on, he says this.
Thou shalt not obey the 10 commandments because those aren't your commandments. Yours are better. And yours are far less complicated, but they are far more demanding.
Finally, later on in the sermon, he says this.
Peter, James, Paul elected to unhitch the Christian faith from their Jewish scriptures. And my friends, we must as well.
Now, I may get in trouble for this, but I agree with Stanley in the sense that the requirements of the new covenant are certainly less complicated, but more demanding than that of the Old Testament. Let me explain. In the Old Testament, you can obey the 10 commandments, and at the end of the day, you feel like you are a good saint. But in the New Testament, God doesn't give us a list of do's and don'ts, essentially, or a whole bunch of laws. He says the law is written on your heart. And he says, I'm going to give you two of them, love God and love your neighbor. And so that way, even though it's less complicated, it's much more demanding because it's a whole lot more difficult at the end of the day to check off those two boxes and say, I've loved God with all of my heart and I've loved all of my neighbors. And so I don't believe that Stanley is saying that there is no value at all in the Old Testament. I believe what he's saying is that there is a new covenant and therefore God relates to his people in a new way. For instance, if somebody in the church is caught in adultery, we don't look to the Old Testament as it relates to what we should do or instructions on how to handle that person. Because if that was the case, half the people in the church would have to be stoned right now. We don't look to the Old Testament for our instructions. No, the church looks to the New Testament in terms of how to deal with somebody who may be caught in adultery. But I don't believe we can take these sound bites from Andy Stanley and suggest that he's a false teacher because he is saying that the Old Testament doesn't have any value. I just don't believe that's what he was really actually trying to communicate whenever he said this. So, is Andy Stanley a false teacher? I'm going to have to say no. I don't believe he's a false teacher for the reasons why people say that he is. Next up on the list is number 5, Tim Mackey, the lead narrator at the Bible Project.